Hello, everybody. This is Jared Altic, and I am talking to a friend of mine named Cynthia Smart. She's a minister and a chaplain that I've worked with in Kansas City, and I called her up and want to talk to her about her story. And so, hello, Cynthia.
Well, hello, Brother Jared. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm glad we finally got this conversation started. It took a little while with your moving and big changes in your life.
Yes, but I'm here now.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy for it. Let's start kind of with your story. I'd like to hear how about your upbringing and like church experience growing up and that kind of thing. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I am a native of Wichita, Kansas. That's where I was born and raised. Um, I also grew up in St. Mark United Methodist Church
Uh-huh.
In Wichita. And so, I went through my elementary, junior high as it was at my time in high school. And I graduated in 1980. And after that, I attended Wichita State University as a music performance major.
Really?
And I played in the marching band. I believe it was saxophone in the marching band, and
Right.
I was also in the orchestra. I played bassoon in the orchestra.
Really? I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, and so I spent 2 years there pursuing that, and then I decided that I wanted to have some type of trade, so I could actually enter into the job force.
Right.
And so I went to electronic school.
There's probably not a lot of work for bassoonists out there.
Well, as most music majors actually also do education,
Sure.
so they're
Sure.
able to teach. Yeah, and I wasn't really interested in teaching. So I would have to really have depended
Right.
upon my musical skills to get jobs. So anyway, I decided,
Right.
let me expand myself. And so I've always liked electronics. I used to, put my own car radios in or stereos in, and I took stuff
Right.
apart all the time. So I went to Wichita Automotive Electronic Institute, and within less than a year, I think it was like an 8 or 9 month program,
Mm-hmm.
I became a certified electronic tech.
Oh, wow.
hmm
Yeah.
And from there, they part of the going to their school was a guaranteed of employment. So one of my first jobs out was a copier. I worked for the Wichita School Board and went to all the
Really?
schools to maintain their copy machines. And so that lasted all of maybe, I don't know, I think I might have got a month in, maybe two. And then I was able to go to, it was called IFR.
Okay.
They produced electronic equipment for the military and also for
Right.
aircraft. And so I was one of the I was the only female bench tech at that time. That would have been in the early or mid 1980s.
Right.
And so I did that for a few years. And I guess really 2 years, because after I think 2 years, I got married. And so then my husband was in the Air Force.
Right. And there's a
And
big Air Force base in Wichita, right?
it is, but
Yeah.
he was actually, he wasn't living in Wichita at the time when he went in. And so he was in Florida. And so he came back and we got
Right.
married, and then we relocated to Okinawa, Japan. So I lived in
Oh, wow.
Okinawa.
Wow.
Yeah. Kadena Air Force Base was the base that
Sure.
he was stationed at. So over there, I had various jobs as well. And also, I continued my education because they did offer, there was a college that offered classes. So I
Right.
was there like
Right.
2.5 years.
So how do you get from your music and electronics to being a minister?
Well, I came back from Okinawa, went back to church, to my home church. And then I was asked, like almost as soon as I got back, if I would help teach the junior high Sunday school class. And so I started
Right.
teaching that, and I taught. I think I taught them for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. Um, and then I took what they had at the time, discipleship classes. It was a series of books that one of our United Methodist bishops actually wrote,
Hmm.
study called discipleship. And so I took the first one, and in the class, our teacher said this was the class where she received her call.
Mm.
And at that time, I was like, she looked at me. She was looking at me when she made the statement. And I said, well, the only reason I'm taking this is because it took you from Genesis to Revelations. It was like a 34-week course.
Right.
And I said, so I said, I just wanted, to get more knowledge of the Bible. That's why, like, why are you looking at me? So, we get
Did
through
you
that.
understand? Did you understand a calling at that point? Even what she meant, really, by that? Was that? I mean, was that
Yeah,
language you were familiar with, or
yes. Yes, it
yeah?
was. Yeah. And my pastor at the time, he was out of a Baptist background.
Okay.
Um, and then she was an engineer actually at Boeing. And so while and her husband was also an engineer, she received her calling under him. And so I
Hmm.
had saw that whole process, from
Okay.
her, what she, how she went through. So yeah, I understood that very well, I had some concept. And so anyway, I took the class. Like I said, I think it was 32, 34 weeks, finished it. Life is still chugging along, still working. And then took the second, because it was at that time, they had another book come out. So I
Right.
signed up for the second leg of it. And it was within that almost halfway through that I received my call.
Hmm.
Actually, it probably started before that, because I mean, I kind of skipped a little bit. But when I was when I came back from Okinawa, I started up the video ministry. So I was always very active in not only
Right.
teaching, but also the video part, taping the services. So people would ask, or they would say to me, when are you going to come from behind the camera? And I'm like, I'm
Right.
good.
Right.
I liked it
See,
there.
I wonder if that teaching degree would have helped you, because you ended up teaching at several
Well,
points in your life, within
well,
the church.
yeah, the teaching, yeah, but I didn't want to teach as a living. That wasn't some that I
Sure.
did not feel called to do that. But
Right.
as a
Right.
pastor, we're always teaching anyway. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
mhm.
Yeah. So, y- did you have a Jonah kind of experience? Did you resist that
Mhm.
feeling of being called, or was it easy for you to jump right in and start a track on ministry?
When we got back from Okinawa, I eventually started working. I worked at McDonald's first. And what happened, I worked the morning shift. And of course, usually it's the same folk. And there was a guy that I served every morning, and he was an engineer from NCR. He worked at NCR, National Cash Register. And so, we kind of, you get to know people. And I shared with him, once I knew what he did, I says, well, I'm a certified tech. And, actually, we toured his company. I had a
Right.
chance to tour his company at one time. And so I was familiar with it a little bit. And so one morning he came in and he says, I just want you to know that we're hiring.
Hmm.
And, I can put a word in for you, whatever. And so I went to that interview, and I got the position. I was like the last one. It was like 5 of us. As I was working there, I worked there for about 10 years. So you want to know how the Jonah experience. Well, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened was one day after I got off work, I just kept feeling something, that I just felt I just needed to go somewhere. I just did not want to. I just didn't want to be in Wichita.
Sure.
And it was near the holiday weekend, the 4th of July, and I had been asked. A friend of mine, her neighbor, asked me to work his food truck. And so, I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. And so he was going to park it at the Walmart, not Walmart, but Kmart. And
Right.
he was selling Mississippi fried catfish dinners. And so I was selling these fish dinners. So one night after I got off work, I just started leaving and I headed up toward Newton. Anyway, I ended up at this field and it was on fire. And
Really?
it was on fire because they burned the fields. You know how they
Right.
burn the fields?
Right.
And I had never been that close to anything like that. And so I was just sitting in my car watching this field burn. And in my mind, it was, I was saying, this is what hell is like. I kept hearing like,
Yeah.
this is hell. This is what hell is like.
Yeah.
Because it was real dark and those
Yeah.
fires they burn real, real bright.
Yeah.
So I decided I'll get back in my car and I started heading back to Wichita. When I was headed back, it's like I could tell something wasn't quite right, like the weather was changing or something, like rain or something. Anyway, I did not go home, and I ended up at the airport Hilton they had a hotel out there.
Right.
So I went there and I just, was just chilling out, having a couple of drinks or whatever. And then the lights flickered. And I still did not know what was going on, but a storm had moved in.
Right.
And so when I just felt I couldn't go home, and so I went to check, see if I could get a room. And the guy behind the counter, I said, well, how much are your rooms? I think he said like $60. And I'm like, I just need it for a few hours, or, because it was late, like, I don't know, 4 hours maybe. He says, well, I don't have anything because it's the weekend rate. He says, but there's plenty of hotels on Kellogg that are cheaper. So you can get one of those. And
Okay.
he had kind of an accent. And I said, so where are you from? I said, where are you from? And he also had on a Star David, and his name was Samuel. And so I said, so where are you from? And he says, I'm from here. I said, no, you're not from here. He said, okay, I'm from Jerusalem.
Right. Right.
And his name was Samuel.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So Star David.
So you're starting to feel like God is prodding you along here, right? All the biblical imagery and everything else.
Right. And so he says, so I says, well, by that time I said, well, you know what? I don't need a room. So when I got outside, it was storming extremely bad. And I had an old Fairlane, 1974 Fairlane, or it could have been 64. It was old. But the motor for the windshield wipers didn't work. And so I'm like, how am I going to get up this road on the highway? And it was at that time I heard God's voice say, take up your cross and follow me in the car.
Yeah.
And so, take up your cross. And so I said, yes, I'll go.
Wow.
As soon as I said that, I felt a release, and I was able to drive. And so as I'm driving, it wasn't so bad I couldn't see at that time. And so I made it to this hotel,
Right.
and the name of the hotel was Night's Inn. And it had the sign that said vacancy. And when I went in there, like I said, nobody was on Kellogg because it had been storming extremely bad. I get in
Yeah.
there and the guy says, I've been waiting for you. And here's your keys. And he turned off the light and he left.
Huh. Wow. Wow.
And
Very
so,
surreal. Yeah. Huh.
so the next morning, I head back. I'm on the west side, so I live way on the east side. And on my way back, I saw where all the like power lines were down,
Right.
trash cans, trees were uprooted. So if I would have tried to even go home, it would not have been good. So that particular
Wow.
storm wiped out majority of the power to the city. So I didn't even have
Right.
power, because I was going to go and work at that fish stand or at the food truck. So I went home to get
Right.
cleaned up. I had no power. So once I got myself ready, I went on over to the Kmart, and he was glad I came because nobody had power. They couldn't cook.
Mm.
So we were selling fish on top of fish we were just selling dinners. And so my pastor, the way it worked in our church was when you received your call, you went to him
Right.
and he would announce it to the congregation. And I, pretty much figured out, he's busy. He's not going to, so I had already figured out that I wasn't going to tell him anything about what had happened. And so I'm sitting there selling my fish. And first of all, he doesn't shop at Kmart, so I'm safe there. And he doesn't
Right.
eat any seafood. So I think I might have seen, I don't even know if his wife came by, but there was a lot of people that day
Right.
from
Right.
my
Because of the storm.
church
Right.
who came and bought fish or saw me.
Right.
And so he came and I wasn't even that was the farthest thing from my mind. And then he pops up at the window and he looks in, he says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm selling fish." And he said, "Oh, okay." And it wasn't a whole lot to the conversation. And then so he's just kind of looking, and checking things out. And then I said, there is something I do need to talk to you about. And he just looked at me and he says, "I'll announce it Sunday."
It's almost like Jesus calling the apostles from their fishing boats. I mean, that's incredible. That's a fantastic story. Yeah. That is awesome. So where did you end up? Where was your first ministry position?
Well, when I went to seminary, uh, I was the assistant pastor at Crossroads United Methodist Church.
Okay.
And, whatever pastor my senior pastor needed, Pastor Waters needed,
Hmm.
I assisted her. I did some preaching, but like you say, I did some teaching as well. But my
Sure.
main focus, my main ministry, her church was located in Compton, California. And so
Okay.
on the weekends, I would drive up and literally walk the streets of Compton
Hmm.
and talk to folk and pray with folk and minister
Wow.
on the streets. And so that's really what I did for my 4 years when
Yep.
I was there. And then after I graduated, my first appointment was in Hayes, Kansas, and there I was an associate pastor, and I was the first African American female
Right.
that they ever had.
Well,
So
that leads me to a couple questions. One, I was interested in your thoughts as far as the challenges that you see as a woman in ministry.
mhm,
And then after we talk about that, I'd like to double back on going from Hayes to Kansas City, then back to Minneapolis.
mhm,
You've had some real variety in your ministry, also. And so
mhm,
let's talk about being a
yeah.
woman in ministry first. What kind of challenges do you feel like you experience, and what have you overcome? And do you have any advice for people?
You know, I'm fortunate in a way to be a part of a denomination that I think they ordained their first female over 50. It's been over 50 years ago now.
Right.
Um, but even with that, the challenges tend to be, um, folks don't always accept women pastors, or they
Right.
struggle with women being in leadership as a pastor. Um,
Do you have more trouble with men or with women accepting female leadership?
Actually, it from my experience, for the most part, men have been very accepting. Women sometimes are not as much. You know,
Hmm.
um, I don't know if it's I really don't. I don't quite understand the dynamics. But when I
Sure.
minister with men, because men, tend, what do we need to do? They're very more. I don't know. It's a different kind of dynamic in,
Right.
men's ministry. I've always, supported men's ministry. How can I support you? And so you never know. You never know.
Yeah.
If it's because my all my appointments, except Kansas City, have been white churches.
Right.
So I've always been in cross racial appointments.
Right.
So some folks they struggle also with, my race, you
Hmm.
know, so that can be some issues around that I've had to deal with. So sometimes I don't always know, is it my gender, or if is it my race,
Sure.
but I always
Sure.
try to have, not be so reactive, because, a lot of times folks got their own stuff they need to work out, but I won't, I'm not going to allow you to mistreat me.
Right.
If there's an issue around something, we need to work it out, but
Yeah.
God created you, God created me, we're all different. And, so I love you for who you are, so yeah, it's always stuff,
Oh
always
yeah.
something.
Yeah. Well, I can
But
tell you as a white male in a predominantly white church, it's still you still as a minister can feel pretty isolated. And
mhm.
I've never really had to think about my gender or my race specifically, but I often have felt like I was alone and that people, were hesitant to follow me or trust me or whatever. There's always those struggles interpersonally, and so some of that happens. Anyway, I think the baseline is pretty high when you're in ministry already, as far as, being able to have, close friendships within the church and that kind of thing. It's always
Yeah,
difficult. And
right,
so,
right.
if there's other factors that people may have, they have their own personal issues or whatever, that would then add to that. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, this can be pretty challenging. And so, can you tell me, how you got into? Well, actually, we should probably back up because I asked you two questions, didn't I? I asked you about being a woman in ministry, but I also
Hmm.
asked you about going from Hayes to Kansas City, and back to Minneapolis, and maybe there were other churches in between. I'm not sure,
Yeah,
but
well, I've been in ministry as an ordained elder now for about 20 years. And so, like I
hmm
say, the first appointment I had was in Hayes. That was 2 years. And then from Hayes, which was really a change for me, I was very hesitant to accept it
right,
because, I've never, I lived, like I said, I lived in Wichita and I did live in Okinawa, but never in a rural area, and especially one that wasn't very diverse, you
right,
know,
right,
people, So I'm like, I, so I reached out to my senior pastor, and he said, Cynthia, I know it's not what you feel you're called to, but this is a good appointment. It'll be good for you.
hmm,
And so after speaking with him and, praying about it, and then I went, actually, when I went, the senior pastor and the associate pastor were both exiting at the same time. So they were
oh wow,
bringing
okay,
me and a new senior pastor in together as brand
okay,
new pastors. So I had an opportunity to meet him and also to go up to the church and, get a feel for it. So I was there for 2 years. And then from there, I went to Kansas City, Kansas, which, you know, even though it was a predominantly white church, the community had changed. So
Right.
now it was majority African American and Hispanic, but more at that time because that would have been in 2002.
Right.
So and then I was a co-pastor. So there was another pastor there who had been there since he was in seminary, had done a lot of great work. He lived in the community, had developed some really good programs for the youth there. And so their thing, he put together, or the church put together this program or this, what they call the next generation. And so
Hmm.
it was to help the church transition into a more diverse congregation and church to reach out to their community or to their neighbors.
Right.
And so that part of that was to bring in an African American pastor. So we were working, together for a couple of years there, and I believe it definitely made a difference, with
Yeah.
the community acceptance and coming into the church. So I did that for 2 years, and then I went to Wichita, my home, and I had two churches for 3 years, and then I ended up with just the one, and it was in a very, challenging, economically challenged community called Plainview. And Plainview was
Right.
it was like they call it a miracle city because it was almost built overnight. Um, these houses that they built and properties that they built were actually supposed to be temporary, and they were built for the
Mm.
Boeing workers who built the aircraft for World War II.
Right.
But it was its own self-contained city with it had all the schools from elementary to high school, movie theater, swimming pool, shopping. It had everything.
Right.
And anyway, throughout the years, it became a very transient community. But the church, Brookside, the one that I pastored in Plainview back in the day when it was, when the government owned it, they had no churches. When I mean they had no churches, they had no church buildings. So they
Right.
zoned this area. So each zone would have a church, but they would do it in another building. So like ours was in a school, in an elementary school that happened to be actually by a brook. But the
Right.
men
Right.
would come and set it up every Sunday. So when the government said they would people could actually buy that property, then the church bought a piece of property and they built a church building. And they walked from the school. I think it was like Easter morning or Palm Sunday. And they
Right.
walked from the school across that bridge to do their groundbreaking and
Oh.
also to do their I guess their first Sunday in the church.
Right.
And
Right.
so they were very outreach oriented, in their mindset. They always wanted to reach out and help the community. So they started a thrift store, a store they would sell clothes and things like that. And the matriarch, the one that really was it was a couple of them. Uh,
Right.
their thing was they wanted to build dignity in the people. So they didn't want to give the clothes away. So they would sell them clothes. And she
Right.
says it makes a difference, even though you only charge them like a dime for a shirt, because it was probably a dime back then.
Sure. Sure.
Um, they had dignity
Yeah.
because
It still mattered that they were paying
it's
for it.
like I
Yeah.
bought this shirt.
Yeah.
And also they started a clinic. The church actually started a clinic, a health clinic.
Hmm.
And eventually it transitioned over to the Hunter Health Clinic, which is an Indian clinic, but they serve all people. So I was there for
Right.
6 years. And then I came back to Kansas
Mm.
City, and that's when I was at Mason. And so I served
Right.
Mason from 2010. Yeah, 2010 until now.
So 10 years, and that seems unusually long. Most of the United Methodist ministers I know are moved pretty frequently. And so 10 years in one place, That's a little bit longer tenure, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, it's most pastors are moved with if it's a long within probably 7 years.
Right. Right.
But to get 10 is pretty for now is yeah, it's
Yeah.
but if it's a good they're getting to where, if it's a good fit, but oftentimes in our denominations when people retire, they have to fill those slots. And so, you have so
Right.
many elders, so you gotta people have to shift. But
Yeah.
so I know it's a little
So
different
that's
than
the time
the
frame.
call system. Hmm.
Yeah. No, that's the time frame where I met you, and
Hmm.
I specifically met you through the chaplaincy. The
Hmm.
We have in Kansas City, Kansas, a chaplains association that serves the police department, fire department. How did you get involved in doing chaplaincy?
Uh, Chaplaincy there. Well, actually, I took CPE, clinical pastoral education, when I was in seminary.
Right.
So I took a unit one summer. So that's where I really kind of learned the nuts and bolts of chaplaincy
Hmm.
there. But when you met me, I had been serving Mason for 5 years, and I had been asked by um, Pastor Kemper, Pastor May, and Pastor Netling to join several years, 5 years before I said yes.
They had to work
And
on you for a while,
I
huh?
was like,
Yeah.
I had no desire to serve in that capacity. Of course, I had all sorts of excuses. I don't have the time, I don't have the
Sure.
desire, whatever,
Sure.
whatever. Um, so after you say, me, once you say no, I don't care how many times you come back, I'm not interested. Well, I every year our church would do church in the park, which was actually at the lake, Wyandotte Lake.
Uh huh.
And after I finished my sermon, or at the close of my sermon, I challenged my congregation. I said, I'm going to challenge you to just do one thing, just one thing to make a difference in our community or in your community. And after I said that, I was like, I shouldn't have said that to myself, because
Sure. Yeah.
it was like for 5 years, they've asked you to serve in this capacity. You know, they
Yeah.
needed you, because it was not at the time, Sister Therese was the only female, but she, at that time, she doesn't take calls.
Yeah.
And, so we need your presence. And so, anyway, after I preached that, I think it was that Sunday, actually, I called Mike and I said, I want to go ahead and become a chaplain. And so they pretty much, it was really a fast track. And I was down there at the office and George got a page and he says, would you like to go with, actually it was the day I got my badge.
Okay.
And it's that day. And he said, I got a page. You want to come with me? Because I needed to shadow people anyway. So I said,
Sure.
sure. So it was right there on Quindaro up the road. And it had been I think it was a drive-by, it was a double homicide. And so we went through the crime tape to
Yeah.
get to the other side. And so as we're walking, we come in contact with the father of one of the guys that was killed. And, he wasn't very, of course, not in a good space at all. But he eventually calmed down after, George said, we're here for you. Because I guess often people see our uniforms and
Right.
connect us with the police. But anyway, so he kind of calmed down, and then his sister, because there was two cousins who were killed, and she was not happy, and she really didn't want anything to do with us, and made sure we knew that.
Hmm.
So a lot of people, unfortunately, because of the scope of the way they did the perimeter, people got stuck and they couldn't leave. So the only reason they were there was because their vehicles were inside the crime scene.
Right. And they couldn't cross the tape.
They couldn't cross the tape.
Right.
So, they're kind of stuck. And then, of course, by that time, kids were getting out of school, folks were on their cell phones. So it became a pretty, crowded, space with this and people trying to, it was just. But anyway, once the the remains are removed, that's when people like, oh, okay, whatever,
Right.
it's over, we can go.
Right.
And then they finally take the tape down. But before they, when they were moving the body, or maybe after they moved the body, we were able to pray with those who had gathered, who wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was my first call.
Yeah. Well, can I tell a story about my first call? I got a page. It was the first time I had the pager in the chaplain's car, and I was actually in a meeting, and the meeting was about over, and the pager went off. And so I jumped up, said, "Oh, I got to go. And I called Chaplain Smart and said, I've got a call. It's down on this place, because I was supposed to be shadowing, and it was so hard. We don't get called that frequently. And so it's so hard to get a new chaplain a chance to work with an experienced chaplain. And it was a cold, like maybe January morning, and an older gentleman had fallen down outside during the night and froze to death. And we got there, and of course the body had been moved inside the house, and there were family members in two different houses, and they were very upset. And Chaplain Smart arrived, and I was so happy to see you because I didn't know what I was doing. And you just walked right in, and you talked to the sergeant, and you talked to the detective, and you went over to the family, and you prayed with them, and they responded so well to you. And I learned so much standing there, watching that and taking that all in. I feel like I have a confidence when I go to a crime scene or the scene of a natural death or a suicide. I have a confidence that I would not have had, except that I watched you just walk in, and you just were ready to serve and ready to love people. And I learned a lot from you that day. That will be seared in my memory forever. And so I really, really appreciate it. And I thought you did a great job there. That time that we worked on my very first page. And so
you did good, Jared. You did really good.
Well, I'm learning, and I hope other chaplains are learning too. I hope that they are encouraged. Some of them are active in ministry, some aren't. Like in the church. I mean,
right.
But it's tough because we're not cops, but we're working alongside first responders, police officers, and firefighters. And sometimes we're wearing some sort of badge or uniform or shirt that has the emblem on it, but we're not uniform personnel. We're separate from that, and we're ambassadors of the kingdom of Christ. And so that is an important responsibility, and people don't know what to do with us sometimes. Whether we're trying to help the family of victims or whether we're trying to minister to the first responders. Sometimes they don't know what to do with us or how to talk to us, and so it can be a lonely job, but it is an important one. And I'm glad you were there to kind of mentor me and help me with getting started.
You're welcome, Doc.
What plans do you have for the future? You're at a new church, so you left Kansas City and went back out to central Kansas to a rural community in Minneapolis. In fact, you said you were going to Minneapolis. I thought you meant Minnesota. Yeah.
I know. Until I put the Kansas on it, that's where everybody's minds goes. But it's Minneapolis,
I bet there's
Kansas.
a big difference.
It's 20 minutes. Oh yeah. You know what I learned is that people from Minneapolis, Minnesota, come here to get postcards to say they've been here.
That's awesome.
They roll up, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, so you're at a new church. You're a little bit closer to family in Wichita, right? Probably
an hour and 30 minutes.
Yeah. So that's
A
probably
lot
half the
better.
time. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Tell me the name of the church again.
Minneapolis First United Methodist Church.
Excellent, excellent.
Hmm.
And I've seen some pictures you've put on Facebook and such. It looks like you are learning some new hobbies and meeting new people,
Yeah,
and I just pray that you have a
yeah.
wonderful and fruitful ministry
And a
out
matter of
there.
fact, the day before the day, one of my members took. He owns a lot of land and he farms a lot of land here. So he took me
Uh
and
huh.
showed me all of his combines and all his equipment and
Oh wow,
the
that could be interesting.
soybeans. Oh yeah, and his whole operation. So
Yeah.
that was really. I'm sure I'll post some of that a little bit later, but yeah,
Well, I'll be
yeah,
looking for it. I'll be
yeah.
looking for it.
So it's been good.
That's
Hmm.
awesome. That's awesome. Anything else you want to plug or promote?
For those, I know everybody's in their own, spread out, in the night. I guess is this all United
Oh yeah,
States?
yeah,
Okay.
mostly. Yeah.
Okay. So you can also look at our church. We're on Facebook Live on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock. Just plug
Uh
in
huh.
Minneapolis First United Methodist Church, and also on YouTube you can catch those as well. So
That's
thank you.
awesome. That's awesome. Well, God bless you, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. I hope I get to talk to you real soon.
All right, you take care, Jared. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.